In a world addicted to noise, the empath becomes dangerous in silence. Most people think loneliness is a weakness. They believe if someone has only a few friends, or no friends at all, something must be wrong with them. But psychology tells a different story. Some of the most emotionally intelligent people on Earth slowly disconnect from the crowd not because they hate people, but because they can see through them. And that changes everything. An empath doesn't walk into a room and just hear words. They absorb tension. They notice the fake smile that lasted half a second too long. They hear insecurity hiding behind confidence. They feel emotional shifts before anyone speaks. Their nervous system scans human behavior like a threat detector operating 24 hours a day, and science confirms this is real. Researchers studying mirror neurons discovered that highly sensitive individuals process emotional information more intensely than average people. Their brains react stronger to facial expressions, tone changes, and emotional energy. In other words, empaths are not imagining things. Their brains are literally built to read people deeper than most humans can tolerate. That sounds like a superpower. But here's the dark side nobody talks about. The deeper you see into people, the harder it becomes to stay connected to them. Because most social interaction is performance. Most friendships survive on distraction, convenience, gossip, or emotional dependency. But empaths crave authenticity. They want depth, truth, real connection. And when they don't find it, they slowly pull away. Not dramatically, silently. That's why powerful empaths often end up alone. Not because nobody likes them, but because shallow relationships physically exhaust them. Studies on emotional contagion show that humans unconsciously absorb the emotional states of people around them, but empaths absorb more than others. Their cortisol levels rise faster in toxic environments. Their nervous systems become overstimulated. Even one manipulative person can drain them for days. This is why many empaths disappear from social circles without explanation. People think they became cold, but in reality, they became protective. The average person can tolerate fake conversations for years. An empath reaches a breaking point much faster because their body experiences emotional dishonesty as stress. That's why crowded rooms often make them tired. That's why constant texting drains them. That's why they need isolation after social interaction. And here's the part most people misunderstand. Isolation is not always depression. Sometimes isolation is recovery. Neuroscientists found that highly sensitive individuals process stimulation deeper in the brain's insular region, the area connected to awareness, empathy, and emotional meaning. This means empaths don't just experience more emotion. They process emotion longer. So while everyone else moves on quickly, the empath is still mentally replaying the energy, words, and intentions behind what happened. And eventually they realize something painful. Many people only love access, not connection. They love what the empath gives them: advice, comfort, emotional support, understanding. But when the empath needs the same thing in return, the room goes quiet. This is why powerful empaths become selective. Not arrogant, selective. Because after enough betrayal, they stop chasing friendships built on emotional imbalance. And that's when their real power begins. Psychologists call this emotional differentiation, the ability to separate your emotions from the emotions of others. Most people never develop this skill. Empaths are forced to learn it through pain. At first, they absorb everyone's problems. Most people believe loneliness is a punishment. They see someone sitting alone in silence and immediately assume something is wrong with them. Broken childhood, social anxiety, emotional instability. But what if the opposite is true? What if some people isolate themselves because their minds are processing more emotional information than the average human brain can survive every day? That is the hidden reality of powerful empaths. They do not walk away from people because they hate connection. They walk away because too much emotional exposure becomes psychological suffocation. Science has started uncovering something terrifying about highly empathetic people. Brain scans show that emotionally sensitive individuals experience stronger activation in mirror neuron systems, the part of the brain connected to emotional understanding and imitation. In simple words, empaths do not just observe emotion, they internally experience it. When someone near them is anxious, their nervous system reacts. Mione is angry, their heart rate changes. When someone hides pain behind a smile, the empath feels the contradiction before a single word is spoken. Most people enter a room and hear conversations. Empaths enter a room and absorb emotional weather, and that level of psychological processing comes with a cost. Researchers studying highly sensitive nervous systems discovered that overstimulation increases cortisol levels faster in emotionally aware individuals. Cortisol is the body's primary stress hormone. Too much of it over time damages sleep, weakens immunity, increases inflammation, and slowly exhausts the brain. That means toxic people are not just emotionally draining to empaths. They can become biologically damaging. This explains something most people misunderstand about empaths. Why do they suddenly disappear? Why do they stop answering messages? Why they vanish from social circles without warning? It is rarely because they stopped caring. It is because their nervous system reached overload. Most humans can tolerate shallow conversations for years because they emotionally detach from them. But empaths process every interaction at a deeper neurological level. Fake laughter, passive we, aggression, hidden resentment, emotional manipulation, these things do not slide past an empath unnoticed. Their brain catches everything, and eventually the emotional weight becomes unbearable. Psychologists call this emotional contagion. Humans unconsciously absorb the emotional states of the people around them. But in empaths, this process becomes amplified. Studies found that emotionally sensitive individuals often experience physical fatigue simply from prolonged exposure to negative emotional environments. Imagine carrying invisible emotional weight every single day, not your emotions, everyone else's. Now imagine doing that for years. This is why powerful empaths start craving silence the same way a dehydrated body craves water. Isolation becomes recovery. Solitude becomes medicine. And here is where society completely misreads them. The world worships extroversion, constant socializing, endless communication, public visibility. But neuroscience suggests that highly sensitive people experience social stimulation differently. Their brains process information more deeply, meaning environments that energize others can psychologically exhaust them. What looks like antisocial behavior is often nervous system protection. And once an empath understands this truth, everything changes. They stop forcing themselves into environments that poison their peace. They stop apologizing for needing space. They stop believing something is wrong with them for feeling too much. Because the deeper truth is this: empaths are not weak because they feel intensely. They are overwhelmed because they feel accurately. Most people ignore emotional tension until it explodes. Empaths detect it instantly. Their subconscious mind constantly scans facial expressions, tone shifts, inconsistencies, and behavioral patterns. Some psychologists compare this ability to advanced threat detection. The empath notices danger long before others do. That is why manipulative people often dislike emotionally intelligent empaths immediately. Because empaths see what others miss: the fake kindness, the forced charm, the hidden hostility behind polite words. And manipulative personalities depend on emotional blindness to maintain control. But here is the tragedy. For most of their lives, empaths think their sensitivity is the problem. So they overcompensate. They become people pleasers. They overgive. They absorb everyone's pain. They try to heal broken people while slowly breaking themselves. Until one day the nervous system fights back. Burnout begins. Sleep problems appear. Mental exhaustion becomes constant. Some studies even link chronic emotional stress to increased inflammation, digestive disorders, weakened immunity, and cardiovascular strain. The body does not separate emotional pain from physical survival. To the nervous system, emotional chaos is still danger. And eventually the empath reaches a terrifying realization. Being around the wrong people feels worse than being alone. That realization changes everything. Because now solitude no longer feels empty. It feels safe. This is why powerful empaths often become extremely selective with relationships. They understand that every human interaction carries emotional energy. Every conversation affects the nervous system. Every toxic relationship leaves psychological residue. So they stop giving unlimited access to their inner world. And the moment they do this, people become uncomfortable. Friends accuse them of changing. Family members call them distant. Manipulators call them selfish. But what is actually happening is psychological awakening. The empath is learning boundaries. For the first time in their life, they realize they are not responsible for fixing every broken person they meet. And that realization is revolutionary. Because boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They determine who has access to your emotional energy and who does not. Without boundaries, empaths become emotional dumping grounds for narcissists, users, and emotionally unstable people. But with boundaries, their sensitivity transforms into one of the most powerful psychological strengths a human can possess: pattern recognition, intuition, emotional intelligence, human lie detection, deep observation. These abilities become sharper in silence. That is why solitude becomes transformation for powerful empaths. Away from emotional noise, their thinking becomes clearer. Away from manipulative people, their anxiety decreases. Away from constant emotional stimulation, their nervous system finally resets. And suddenly they begin seeing life differently. They realize not everyone deserves their empathy. Not everyone deserves explanation. Not everyone deserves access. That is not cruelty. That is emotional maturity, because powerful empaths eventually learn the hardest psychological lesson of all. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is survival. And once an empath truly understands this, they stop fearing loneliness forever, because they discover something shocking. The absence of toxic energy creates a level of peace most humans never experience. A peace so deep that chaos becomes intolerable. A peace so healing that fake relationships no longer tempt them. A peace that feels stronger than approval, attention, or social acceptance. And that is why powerful empaths often walk alone. Not because nobody loves them, but because their nervous system can no longer tolerate environments that slowly destroy their soul. Most people spend their entire lives trying to fit into the emotional rhythm of the crowd. But powerful empaths were never built for the crowd. They were built to detect what the crowd ignores. That is why emotional depth becomes both their greatest burden and their greatest weapon. Psychologists have discovered that highly empathetic individuals process emotional information at an unusually intense level. Their brains respond more strongly to facial expressions, vocal tones, and subtle behavioral shifts. In some studies, emotionally sensitive people showed heightened activity in areas linked to awareness, intuition, and emotional meaning. In other words, the empathic brain is constantly scanning for truth, not surface-level truth, emotional truth, and that changes how powerful empaths experience reality itself. While most people hear words, empaths hear intention. While most people notice behavior, empaths notice contradiction. And while others miss danger completely, empaths often feel it before evidence even appears. This is why so many powerful empaths struggle early in life. Because society rewards emotional suppression. Stop overthinking. You're too sensitive. You take things too personally. These phrases slowly teach empaths to distrust their own nervous system. But science now suggests their instincts were often accurate from the beginning. Researchers studying intuition found that the human brain processes massive amounts of subconscious information before conscious awareness catches up. Tiny facial movements, tone fluctuations, changes in eye contact, body tension, emotional inconsistency. The subconscious mind notices all of it long before logic explains it. Empaths live connected to this subconscious data stream almost constantly. That is why they often predict betrayal before it happens. Why they feel uncomfortable around someone everyone else trusts. Why do they sense emotional shifts before relationships collapse? And here is the terrifying part. Most of the time, they are right. But emotional depth becomes dangerous when it lacks boundaries. Because powerful empaths do not only detect pain, they absorb it. This is where their strength becomes self-destruction. Neuroscientists found that emotional pain activates many of the same brain regions as physical pain. Rejection, manipulation, emotional neglect, these experiences are not just feelings. To the nervous system, they are biological stress events. And empaths experience these stress events more intensely than most people. That means every toxic relationship leaves deeper psychological scars. Every betrayal echoes longer. Every emotional wound takes more energy to heal. So in the beginning, emotional depth feels like a curse. Empaths become overwhelmed. exhausted, emotionally burned out. They try to save everyone because they can feel everyone's suffering. They become emotional rescuers, therapists without licenses, human shock absorbers for broken people. And the world rewards them for it at first. People praise their kindness, depend on their understanding, use them as emotional safe spaces. But eventually the empath notices something horrifying. The same people who unload emotional pain onto them rarely ask how they are doing in return. Because emotional givers often attract emotional takers. Psychologists call this emotional asymmetry relationships, where one person gives significantly more emotional energy than the other. Over time, these relationships create exhaustion, resentment, anxiety, and identity loss. And powerful empaths eventually hit a psychological breaking point. Not because they stopped loving people, because they realize unlimited empathy without boundaries becomes self-harm. That realization marks the birth of emotional power. For the first time, the empath stops asking, "How can I help everyone else?" and starts asking, "Why am I abandoning myself to save people who would never save me?" That question changes the brain. Studies on chronic stress reveal that constant emotional overload damages concentration, memory, sleep quality. Immune response, and even cardiovascular health. Emotional exhaustion is not imaginary. The body physically keeps score. And when empaths finally understand this, they stop romanticizing self-sacrifice. They stop confusing suffering with love. They stop believing that being needed means being valued. Because emotional depth was never meant to make them servants to everyone's chaos. It was meant to sharpen perception. And once they redirect their empathy inward instead of endlessly outward, their abilities become extraordinary. Their intuition becomes precise. Their observations become strategic. Their emotional intelligence becomes protection instead of vulnerability. Suddenly they can read manipulation almost instantly. They notice forced charm, love bombing, passive aggression, hidden jealousy disguised as support, micro-expressions of contempt hidden behind smiles. The average person overlooks these signals completely. But powerful empaths develop pattern recognition so advanced that they can sense emotional dishonesty within minutes. This is why emotionally manipulative people often fear self-aware empaths, because awareness destroys deception. And here is where emotional BTH becomes a true psychological advantage. Powerful empaths understand human behavior at a level many people never reach. They know anger is often fear in disguise. They know arrogance usually hides insecurity. They know silence can communicate pain louder than words. This gives them incredible social intelligence when they learn emotional control, not emotional suppression. Emotional control. There is a difference. Suppression buries emotion until it explodes. Control allows emotion without surrendering to it. That is why mature empaths become incredibly calm under pressure. They have spent years surviving emotional storms internally. Chaos no longer shocks them because they have already lived through it psychologically. And this creates something rare in today's world: presence. People trust emotionally grounded empaths because calm nervous systems influence other nervous systems. Research on co-regulation shows that humans unconsciously synchronize emotional states with those around them. A regulated person can literally reduce tension in an entire room. This is why powerful empaths often become natural leaders without trying. Not loud leaders, psychological leaders, the kind with whose presence changes emotional environments instantly. But the greatest transformation happens when the empath finally stops seeing emotional depth as weakness, because the world trained them to believe sensitivity meant fragility. In reality, emotional depth creates resilience most people never develop. Why? Because empaths are forced to confront human nature earlier and more deeply than others. They learn how manipulation works, how emotional masks work, how loneliness works, how pain changes behavior, how trauma shapes personality. And this understanding creates wisdom far beyond their years. The strongest empaths are not the ones who feel nothing. They are the ones who feel everything without letting it destroy them. That is real psychological strength. To remain kind after betrayal, to remain soft without becoming naive, to stay emotionally open while still protecting your peace. Most people become bitter after pain. Powerful empaths become discerning, and that difference changes their entire future. Because once emotional depth becomes disciplined instead of uncontrolled, it turns into one of the rarest strengths a human being can possess: the ability to understand people deeply without losing yourself inside them. And in a world filled with emotional blindness, distraction, and superficial connection, that kind of awareness becomes power. The most dangerous moment in an empath's life is not when they are betrayed. It is the moment they finally realize they were betraying themselves. For years, powerful empaths are taught that love means sacrifice, that being good means always being available, always understanding, always forgiving, always giving people one more chance. And because empaths feel emotions so intensely, they often become addicted to helping others heal. They ignore red flags, excuse toxic behavior, stay loyal to people who slowly destroy their peace. Not because they are weak, but because their nervous system is wired for emotional connection. But psychology reveals something devastating about chronic overgiving. The human brain cannot survive endless emotional stress without consequences. Researchers studying emotional burnout discovered that prolonged exposure to toxic relationships increases cortisol, disrupts sleep cycles, weakens immunity, damages concentration, and raises anxiety levels dramatically. The body begins treating emotions, ional chaos, like physical danger. And for empaths, this damage happens faster. Because empaths do not simply witness emotional pain, they internalize it. Every manipulation becomes mental replay. Every rejection becomes emotional overanalysis. Every conflict becomes a storm inside the nervous system. Most people recover emotionally by distracting themselves. Empaths recover by processing. And that processing never stops. This is why healthy boundaries become life-saving for emotionally deep people. Not optional, necessary. Because without boundaries, empaths slowly disappear inside other people's problems. At first, they barely notice it. They answer every late-night call, absorb every emotional breakdown, try to rescue every wounded person they meet, and society praises them for it. You're such a good person. You're always there for everyone. You understand me better than anyone else. But hidden underneath those compliments is a terrifying psychological trap. The empath becomes valuable for what they provide, not for who they are. And once people become emotionally dependent on an empath's energy, boundaries suddenly feel offensive to them. That is why toxic people react against resolutely when empaths change. The moment the empath says no, manipulation begins. Guilt, silent treatment, victim playing.